The axe split the oak log clean in half with a thunderous crack that echoed across the valley. Maverick Thorpe straightened his massive frame, sweat glistening on his bronzed shoulders as he watched the elegant woman in black emerge from the farmhouse's shadow. Her emerald eyes assessed him with the shrewd calculation of someone who'd learned to judge men quickly and harshly. "You're bigger than I expected," Cordelia Westmere said, her voice carrying the refined accent of Eastern education despite 3 years of prairie hardship. Her raven hair was pulled severely back, but rebellious strands caught the morning light like silk threads. Maverick set down the axe, his calloused hands dwarfing the wooden handle. At 6'8", he towered over most men. But something about this petite widow made him feel ungainly, aware of every mud stain on his worn leather chaps. "Ma'am," touched the brim of his weathered hat. "Heard in town you needed help with the harvest. The other men who came looking for work." She paused, studying the deep lines around his storm-gray eyes.
"Oh."
They talked plenty about what they could do, made grand promises. Then they saw the scope of what needs doing and found excuses to leave. Maverick's jaw tightened. He'd ridden 2 days from Copper Creek after losing his job at the Morrison Ranch, carrying nothing but his father's tools and a reputation for silent reliability. The Westmere farm stretched before them, hundreds of acres of golden wheat bending. In the wind, a barn with a sagging roof, fences that needed mending, and cattle that needed herding before winter set in. "I don't talk much, ma'am," he said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder, "but I can work hard." Cordelia's lips curved in what might have been amusement. "Everyone says they work hard, Mr. Thorpe. Maverick Thorpe. Everyone says they work hard, Mr. Thorpe. Words are cheap as creek water around here." Without breaking eye contact, Maverick walked to where 3 enormous tree stumps had been sitting for months. Remnants of the cottonwoods her late husband had cut before his. Fever took him. The previous applicants had taken one look at those stumps and muttered about needing dynamite or a team of horses. He wrapped his arms around the largest stump, muscles bunching beneath his sun-darkened skin, the grunt that seemed to come. From his very core, he heaved upward. The massive root system emerged from the earth with a grinding, tearing sound, dirt cascading like a waterfall. Cordelia's sharp intake of breath was audible even over the settling earth. Maverick carried the stump to the growing pile of debris, then returned for the second one. "How much?" she asked when he finished with all 3, barely breathing hard. "Room and board? Whatever you think the work's worth come harvest time."
X.
"Not much of a negotiation. Don't need much, ma'am. Just a place to do honest work." She extended her hands, small, soft, but with a grip that spoke of hidden strength. "You can start today, Mr. Thorpe. The bunkhouse is behind the barn." As their hands touched, something electric passed between them, a recognition that neither was prepared to acknowledge. Maverick felt the calluses on her palms, evidence of a pampered woman transformed by necessity into something harder, more resilient. "One thing," Cordelia said, not releasing his hand immediately. "I run this farm. I give the orders. Some men have trouble taking direction from a woman. Some men are fools, ma'am." Her smile was genuine this time, transforming her austere features into something radiant. "We'll see, Mr. Thorpe. We'll see." 3 weeks into September, Maverick had fallen into a rhythm that felt like coming home after years of wandering. Before dawn, he'd milk Cordelia's temperamental cow, Duchess, then tend to the chickens that seemed to have accepted his gentle giant presence. By the time smoke curled from the farmhouse chimney, he'd already repaired whatever had broken the previous day. Cordelia would appear at precisely 6, a clock with coffee so strong it could wake the dead in biscuits that made him forget his. Mother's cooking. They'd discuss the day's priorities in comfortable efficiency, her sharp mind cataloging every detail, his steady presence absorbing her nervous energy. "The McKinnon brothers are coming today to look at the wheat," she announced, setting his plate down with perhaps more force than necessary. "They're offering 12 cents a bushel." Maverick frowned, pausing mid-bite. "Wheat's going for 18 in Dodge City. Heard it at Morrison's before I left. It's a 6-day ride with a full wagon. The McKinnons are here, ready to pay cash. 6 cents difference is $60 on 1,000 bushels, ma'am. That's enough to fix your roof and buy seed for spring." Cordelia's green eyes sparked with something between gratitude and frustration. For 3 years, every decision had been hers alone. Every mistake, every small victory, every sleepless night, wondering if she'd have enough to survive winter. Now, this mountain of a man was quietly making suggestions that doubled her profits. Think I should wait for better offers? Think you should know what your wheat's truly worth before you sell it? The McKinnon brothers arrived at noon, their fancy surrey looking out of place in the farmyard. Jedediah McKinnon, the elder, had the soft hands and calculating eyes of a man who'd grown rich buying low from desperate farmers. "Mrs. Westmere," he said, barely glancing at Maverick. "Beautiful crop this year. We're prepared to offer 13 cents a bushel, cash on delivery." Generous Cordelia replied smoothly, "But I've heard wheat's bringing 20 cents in Kansas City." "Kansas City's a long way, ma'am. A lot of things can go wrong on the road." Maverick stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the smaller man. "What things?" Jedediah's brother Cornelius laughed nervously. "Well, weather, bandits, wagon breakdowns. Wheat doesn't spoil in good weather," Maverick said quietly. "Bandits prefer gold to grain. Wagons break down, same whether you're hauling to town or to Kansas City." The brothers exchanged glances. Jedediah's voice grew colder. "We're offering fair market price for immediate payment, Mrs. Westmere. That's worth something in uncertain times." 15 cents, Cordelia said suddenly. "Cash on delivery? But you provide the wagons and the loading crew." "That's highway robbery. That's my final offer." Her voice carried the steel that had kept her farm running when lesser women would have fled back east. "Take it or leave it." After the brothers left, without a deal, Cordelia found Maverick. Mending harness in the barn, golden afternoon light streamed through the gaps in the wall, illuminating the concentration on his weathered features. "Think I made a mistake?" she asked. He looked up, those storm-gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Think you know your worth now? That's never a mistake." The other men who worked here, they never contradicted the McKinnons, said it wasn't their place. Maybe they were more concerned with keeping their jobs than doing them right. Cordelia moved closer, close enough to smell the honest scent of leather and hay that seemed to follow him. "And you're not worried about your job?" Maverick's hands stilled on the leather straps. "Job ends come harvest anyway, ma'am. Might as well do it right while I'm here." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Soon the wheat would be cut, the debts settled, winter preparations complete, and then what? Would he drift onto another ranch, another temporary position, while she faced another winter alone? "Maverick," she said softly, his name feeling strange and wonderful on her lips. He stood slowly, his great height forcing her to tilt her head back. For a moment, she thought he might say something, might bridge the careful distance they'd maintained. Instead, he touched his hat brim. "Best check. The north fence, before dark, ma'am. Saw some of Henderson's cattle testing it this morning." But as he walked away, Cordelia noticed his hands trembling slightly, and she realized the careful distance was costing him as much as it was costing her. October brought. It's the first hard frost and a telegram that changed everything. Cordelia stood in the Western Union office, her hands shaking as she read the message twice, then a third time. "Bad news, Colton." The postmaster's wife, whose curiosity was legendary throughout Pine Ridge County. "My sister." Cordelia folded the telegram carefully. "She's coming for a visit." What she didn't say was that Vivian was coming to rescue her from what their father called this frontier madness. The telegram made it clear. Sell the farm, return to Boston, marry the banker's son who'd been patiently waiting, and resume the life of a proper lady. Maverick was splitting logs when she returned, his axe rising and falling with mechanical precision. The sight of him, solid, dependable, real, made her chest tight with an emotion she couldn't name. "Need to talk to you," she said. He buried the axe in a stump and followed her to the porch, where she poured him coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. "My family's coming. My sister Vivian and her husband." She stared into her cup. "They want me to sell the farm?" Maverick was quiet for so long she thought he hadn't heard. When she looked up, his gray eyes held a sadness that seemed to go bone deep. Might be for the best, he said finally. This is hard country for a woman alone. I'm not alone.
Oh.
The words burst out before she could stop them, raw and honest and terrifying. Their eyes met and held.
Oh.
In that moment, Cordelia saw her own longing. Reflected in his gaze, the careful walls they'd built crumbling like autumn leaves.
Oh, Cordelia.
Mrs. Westmere, the shrill voice shattered the moment like glass. Vivian Ashworth stood beside a rented carriage, her traveling dress pristine despite the dusty road. Behind her, her husband Reginald looked around the farmyard with barely concealed distaste. Vivian. Cordelia rose, automatically smoothing her work dress. You made good time. You took the first train west after receiving Father's letter. Vivian's sharp eyes fixed on Maverick, taking in his size, his work clothes, the way he stood protectively near Cordelia. I see you've hired ... help. This is Maverick Thorpe? He's been invaluable during harvest season. Maverick touched his hat. Ma'am, sir. Reginald barely acknowledged him. Perhaps your man could see to our luggage? It's not my man, Cordelia began. Course, ma'am. Maverick's voice was carefully neutral. I'll get you settled. As he moved toward the carriage, Vivian gripped Cordelia's arm. Good Lord, Delia. He's enormous. Are you certain he's safe? Safer than most men I've known? That evening, over a dinner that Cordelia had spent hours preparing, Vivian laid out the family's plan with ruthless efficiency. The farm would be sold to a development company. Cordelia would return to Boston, where a small inheritance would provide a modest living. Eventually, she'd married Jeffrey Whitmore, who'd waited 3 years and was prepared to overlook her frontier. Adventure. It's all arranged, Vivian concluded. You'll be back in civilization by Christmas. This is civilization, Cordelia said quietly. My civilization. Delia, really. Look at yourself. Your hands are rough. Your skin is brown as a field hand's. This place has made you coarse. Through the window, Cordelia could see light in the bunkhouse, where Maverick was probably reading one of the books she'd lent him. Over the past month, she'd discovered he was largely self-educated, but possessed a sharp intelligence that made their evening conversations the highlight of her day. This place has made me strong. Strong? Reginald laughed. My dear woman, you're playing at farming while men like your hired hand do the real work? It's charming in its way, but hardly sustainable. Cordelia's temper flared. Maverick doesn't. Do the work for me, he works with me. There's a difference. Maverick Vivian's eyebrows rose. How? ... familiar. He's earned the right to be called by his name. Has he earned other rights as well? It's a question hung in the air like a slap. Cordelia felt heat rise in her cheeks. Not from shame, but from the truth that Vivian had struck too close to. I think this conversation is over. Think carefully, Delia, Vivian said, as Cordelia rose from the table. A woman of your breeding has limited options. Jeffrey won't wait forever, and frontier widows rarely fare well alone. But as Cordelia climbed the stairs to her room, she realized she wasn't thinking about Jeffrey or Boston or her family's expectations. She was thinking about storm-gray eyes and gentle hands that could split logs or mend a broken bridle with equal skill. She was thinking about a man who'd never made her feel weak or helpless, only cherished. And for the first time in 3 years, she was thinking about what she wanted, not what was expected of her. The confrontation came at dawn. Maverick was harnessing the plow horses when Reginald Ashworth approached, his city clothes incongruous in the barnyard. The man's soft features held the kind of cold authority that came from inherited wealth and unquestioned privilege. We need to discuss your employment here, Reginald said without preamble. Maverick continued checking the harness, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Nothing to discuss. Mrs. Westmere hired me. She's the one to let me go. Mrs. Westmere is ... emotionally compromised. She's grown too attached to this primitive lifestyle. Reginald's voice dropped, taking on the tone of man-to-man confidence. Surely you understand that a woman like her, educated, refined, belongs in proper society, not scratching out a living in the dirt. She's built something here worth being proud of. She's playing house with her dead husband's dream. Reginald's composure cracked slightly. And you're taking advantage of a vulnerable woman's isolation and grief. Maverick's hands stilled on the leather straps. When he turned, his gray eyes held a dangerous calm that made Reginald step backward involuntarily. Careful how you finish that thought. I'm offering you $200 to leave today, before you complicate an already difficult situation. The morning air seemed to crystallize around them. Maverick straightened to his full height, his massive frame throwing Reginald into shadow. You think I'm here for money? Men like you are always here for money. Or what passes for it in these circumstances. The insult hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Maverick had faced down rustlers and outlaws, had worked for bosses who treated him like an ox with opposable thumbs, but something about Reginald's casual contempt ignited a fury he rarely allowed himself to feel. 300 then, Reginald pressed, mistaking Maverick's silence for negotiation. That's more than you'd make in a year at honest labor, Mr. Maverick said quietly. You just made 2 mistakes. First, you assumed I was dishonest. Second, you assumed wrong. Before Reginald could respond, Cordelia appeared in the barn. Doorway, her hair loose around her shoulders, and her wrapper hastily thrown over her nightgown. She looked between the two men, reading the tension like a coming storm. What's going on here? I was just explaining to your employee that his services are no longer needed, Reginald said, his confidence returning in her presence. Given the changed circumstances. The only changed circumstance is that my family has decided to interfere in my life. Cordelia's voice carried a steel that made both men look at her sharply. Maverick, saddle Duchess. I need to go to town. Ma'am, Duchess ain't broke to saddle, then hitch the buckboard. I have business with the telegraph office. As Maverick moved to comply, Reginald caught Cordelia's arm. What are you doing? Sending a wire to father, telling him I appreciate his concern, but I won't be returning to Boston. Delia, you're being ridiculous. Can't run this place alone. I'm not alone. The words carried across the barnyard with perfect clarity. Maverick's hands fumbled with the harness buckles as their meaning sank in. Cordelia wasn't just talking about hired help or temporary assistance. She was talking about partnership, about futures built together instead of predetermined paths walked alone. Vivian chose that moment to emerge from the house. Her sharp eyes taking in the tableau, her sister disheveled and defiant, her husband red-faced with frustration, and the giant cowboy standing frozen beside the buckboard. Oh, Delia, she said with pitying condescension. You can't possibly be serious about ... this person, Cordelia said clearly. Has shown me more respect and partnership in 2 months than Jeffrey Whitmore managed in 3 years. Of courtship, Maverick turned then, his storm-gray eyes finding hers across the space between them. The question in his gaze was plain. Was she saying what he thought she was saying? Cordelia walked to him, her bare feet silent on the packed earth. When she reached him, she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, but her voice was steady and sure. I don't want to go back to Boston, Maverick. I want to stay here. I'm with you if you'll have me. The silence stretched like a held breath. Then Maverick's weathered hands came up to frame her face with infinite gentleness. Cordelia, he said, her name rough with emotion. I've got nothing to offer you but hard work and an uncertain future. That's everything I want. Behind them, Vivian made a sound of disgust. This is absurd. Delia, you're throwing away your entire future for what, a fantasy? Cordelia didn't turn around.
Ow!
Her world had narrowed to the man before her, too. The promise in his eyes, and the strength in his hands. For love, she said simply. Something you've never understood. And when Maverick kissed her, gentle and fierce and full of promises, the sun broke over the mountains like a benediction, painting their future in shades of gold. The wedding was planned for the first Saturday in November, but Pine Ridge County's gossips had other ideas. News of the refined widow marrying her giant cowboy spread faster than prairie fire, drawing visitors from 3 counties over. What should have been a simple ceremony became the social event of the season. Cordelia stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the cream-colored silk dress that had arrived unexpected on the morning train, a peace offering from her father, along with a brief note. If this is your choice, make it with dignity. You look beautiful, Vivian said grudgingly. From the doorway. Despite her disapproval, she'd stayed to help with preparations, perhaps hoping to witness her sister's folly firsthand. though I still think you're making a terrible mistake." "I've made plenty of those," Cordelia replied, securing her mother's pearl earrings. "This isn't one of them." Downstairs, the parlor overflowed with townspeople bearing gifts and curious stares. Minister Abernathy, borrowed from the Methodist Church in Sweetwater, fussed nervously with his Bible while eyeing the crowd. He'd never officiated a wedding that drew quite this much attention. Through the window, Cordelia could see Maverick on the front porch, surrounded by local ranchers and farmers who'd worked with him over the years. He looked uncomfortable in his new suit, black wool that emphasized his impressive size, but his face held a quiet contentment that made her heart skip. "5 minutes, dear," called Beatrix Colton, who'd appointed herself unofficial wedding coordinator. Cordelia descended the stairs to find her parlor transformed. Someone had gathered late autumn flowers, goldenrod, and purple asterzand. The mantelpiece glowed with dozens of candles. The crowd parted as she moved through, whispers following. In her wake, ... Never seen a man that big, ... Wonder if he can even write his own name, ... Pretty thing like her. Could have had her picked back east, ... Maverick turned as she approached, and the whispers died. Whatever doubts the townspeople harbored about this unlikely match faded when they saw the look that passed between bride and groom. Recognition so profound it made even the gossips fall silent. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly, taking her hands in his massive ones. "Never been more sure of anything." Minister Abernathy cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today, ... The ceremony blurred past in a haze of candlelight and murmured responses. Cordelia was aware of Maverick's deep voice, promising to love and honor, of her own voice, steadier than she'd expected, making the same vows. When he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, his hands trembled slightly. "You may kiss the bride." Maverick's kiss was gentle, reverent, full of promises for the future they'd build together. The crowd erupted in applause and good-natured cheering, but Cordelia heard only the rapid beating of her own heart. The reception spilled onto the porch and into the yard, fueled by several jugs of corn whiskey that had appeared mysteriously among the wedding gifts. Rancher Josiah Henderson, who had initially been skeptical of the giant newcomer, raised his glass in a toast. "To Maverick and Cordelia Thorpe, may your partnership be as strong as your love." As the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold, the newlyweds found themselves alone on the front porch swing. The last guests had departed, leaving behind a pile of gifts and the comfortable mess of a well-celebrated union. "Mrs. Thorpe," Maverick said, testing the sound of her new name. "I like how that sounds." Cordelia curled against his side, marveling at how perfectly she fit there. "What are you thinking about?" "Thinking about that first day when you asked. If I could work hard, you've exceeded all expectations. Thinking maybe you hired me for more than just the harvest." Cordelia smiled, remembering the electric moment when their hands first touched. The recognition that had passed between them like lightning. "Maybe I did. Maybe I saw something in you that first day, something that made me think you might stay. Forever if you'll have me, I'm counting on it." Later, as they walked through their farm, their home under a canopy of stars, Maverick stopped beside the oak tree where he'd split that first log. The stumps he'd pulled from the ground had been replaced by a garden plot where Cordelia planned to plant roses come spring. "No regrets?" he asked. Cordelia thought of Boston, of the life of comfortable predictability she'd abandoned. Then she looked at the man beside her, strong and gentle and true, and felt only gratitude for the courage that had brought them together. "Only one," she said. "I regret not recognizing what I was looking for until you showed up to provide it." "And what was that?" "A partner? Someone who sees my strength instead of my limitations. Someone who works with me instead of for me." Maverick pulled her closer, his voice rough with emotion. "Cordelia, I need you to know, I've never had much. Never been much. But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the gift you've given me." "You already are," she whispered against his chest. "From that very first day, when you showed me what I was worth, you already were." Spring arrived early to Pine Ridge County, bringing with it the kind of challenges that tested even the strongest marriages. The wheat fields, lush with winter, moisture, were threatened by an invasion of grasshoppers that could devour a season's work in days. Neighboring farms watched helplessly as clouds of insects darkened the sky. Cordelia stood in the farmyard at dawn, studying the approaching swarm, with the calculating gaze she'd inherited from her merchant grandfather. Beside her, Maverick methodically sharpened scythe blades, his movements calm despite the crisis bearing down on them. "Henderson's lost half his crop already," she said, lowering the field glasses. "Morrison's talking about burning his fields. To save what seed wheat he can. Burning won't help if the wind shifts wrong." Maverick tested the blade's edge against his thumb. Might lose everything trying to save half. "So what do we do?" This was the partnership they'd built over 6 months of marriage, neither giving orders. Both contributing expertise, decisions made together through trust earned in countless small moments. Cordelia had learned to read weather signs and soil conditions. Maverick had absorbed her head for numbers and market timing. Together, they'd become formidable. "Remember that article you read from the Agricultural Journal? It's about the farmer in Nebraska who used chickens against locusts." Cordelia's eyes lit up. "She can seed insects, but we'd need hundreds of them, and there's no time to." She stopped, her quick mind leaping ahead. The widow Patterson. "The chicken lady over in Mill Creek. She's got nearly 300 laying hens. She's been trying to sell them because her arthritis is too bad for the work." Within an hour, they were driving the buckboard toward Mill Creek, a plan forming between them with the efficiency of long partnership. Evangeline Patterson, a spry 70-year-old, with eyes sharp as her late husband's razor, listened to their proposal with growing interest. "You want to buy my entire flock? You want to rent them?" Cordelia corrected. "For 2 weeks, we'll transport them, feed them, return them healthy. In exchange, you keep any eggs they lay, and we'll pay you $50 for the service." $50 to let my chickens eat bugs." Evangeline cackled with delight. "Son, your wife's got more sense than most men twice her age." The logistical challenge was enormous. 300 chickens required dozens of temporary coops, careful transportation, and constant supervision. But as word spread through the county, volunteers appeared, farmers whose own crops were threatened, wives who understood the desperation of watching a year's work disappear overnight. By afternoon, the Thorpe farm resembled a military operation. Maverick directed the construction of portable chicken runs while Cordelia organized feeding schedules and transportation routes. The sound of hammering and animated conversation filled the air as neighbors worked together against the common threat. When the grasshopper cloud reached their fields at sunset, 300 chickens were waiting. The battle was both comical and magnificent. Chickens scattered through the wheat rows like feathered infantry, devouring grasshoppers with voracious enthusiasm. Children perched on fence posts, cheering as their favorite hens made particularly spectacular catches. Women kept careful count of birds, while men moved the portable coops to new positions. Cordelia stood beside Maverick on a small rise, watching their experiment unfold. His arm around her waist anchored her as relief and exhaustion wore in her chest. "Think it's working?" she asked. "Look at the wheat." Where the chickens had passed, the grain stood tall and unmolested. The grasshopper cloud, deprived of easy feeding, had split and scattered, seeking easier targets elsewhere. Their fields would survive. "We did it," she breathed. "We did." But the real victory came later, when neighboring farmers began asking about borrowing chicken flocks for their own fields. What had started as desperate improvisation became the foundation for a new kind of agricultural cooperation, farmers sharing resources and knowledge instead of simply competing. That night, as they collapsed into bed, exhausted but triumphant, Cordelia marveled at how naturally they'd worked together. No arguments about leadership, no wounded pride, just two minds focused on solving problems. "I've been thinking," Maverick said into the darkness, "about expanding the farm, our family." Cordelia turned to face him, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. They'd talked around the subject of children, both aware that their marriage had begun with practical necessity as much as love. But in the months since their wedding, that love had deepened into something rich and abiding. "I've been thinking the same thing," she admitted. "This place needs children, needs the sound of young voices, needs someone to carry on what we're building. Are you ready for that?" Children change everything. Maverick pulled her closer, his voice warm with certainty. Everything's already changed, Cordelia. Moment you decided to trust me with your heart, nothing's been the same. Adding children to that, ... It just makes it more complete. Outside, the chickens had settled into contented murmurs, their bellies full of grasshoppers, their work done. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There were always new challenges. But tonight, lying in the arms of the man she'd chosen, Cordelia felt nothing but gratitude for the courage that had brought them to this moment. Their partnership had saved the farm. Now it was time to see what else they could build together. 2 years later, Cordelia stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching her husband rock their 6-month-old daughter to sleep. Maverick's massive hands looked impossibly gentle cradling. Tiny Magnolia Rose, whose dark hair and storm-gray eyes marked her clearly as her father's child. "She's fighting sleep again," he murmured, his deep voice automatically dropping to a whisper in the baby's presence. "Hey, she gets that from you, stubborn. Streak a mile wide. Gets it from her mother, more like. Independent from the day she was born." Cordelia smiled, settling into the chair beside them. The nursery had been Maverick's project over the winter, every piece of furniture crafted by his own hands with a patience and attention to detail that never failed to amaze her. The rocking chair where he sat had been carved from oak taken from their own land, its arms worn smooth by countless midnight vigils. Through the window, the prosperous farm spread beneath spring moonlight. The original wheat fields had been supplemented by a vegetable garden that supplied half the county, chicken coops that housed a permanent flock, and cattle that grazed in pastures where Maverick had once pulled stumps by hand. The Thorpe farm had become a model of innovation and cooperation. Visited by agricultural students from as far away as the state university, but it was the smaller details that spoke of their contentment: flower boxes beneath every window. Porch swing where they spent evening hours planning tomorrow's work. The addition to the house that had grown organically as their family and prosperity expanded. "Mrs. Patterson stopped by today," Cordelia said quietly. She wanted to see the baby, but she also had news. Her nephew's coming to take over the chicken operation. Good for her. She's earned a rest. She asked if I thought you might consider taking on an apprentice, someone young who could learn your methods. Maverick looked up from the baby, interest flickering in his eyes. What kind of apprentice? Boy from town, orphaned last winter when his parents took fever. He's been staying with different families, but he needs somewhere permanent, somewhere he can learn a trade. This was how they made decisions. Now, information shared without pressure, options discussed until consensus emerged. Cordelia had learned that Maverick's quiet thoughtfulness wasn't indecision, but rather a careful weighing of consequences that served them well. How old? 12. Old enough to be useful, young enough to learn proper, and you think, ... I think. This place has room for one more. Think you'd be a good teacher. I think that boy needs the kind of stability we can offer. Maverick shifted the baby to his shoulder, patting her back with practiced ease. Fatherhood had come naturally to him, as if all those years of gentle strength had been preparation for the delicate work of raising children. What's his name? Phoenix? Phoenix Calloway? Phoenix? Maverick tested the name, liking the sound of it, like the bird that rises from ashes. Seems fitting, doesn't it? A boy starting over, learning to build something new from what came before. Later, after Magnolia had finally surrendered to sleep and been tucked into her hand-carved crib, they sat on the porch swing, listening to night sound scattle lowing in the distance. The rustle of wind through wheat, the contented murmur of chickens settling for the night. "You know what I love most about our life?" Cordelia asked, her head resting against Maverick's shoulder. "Tell me. That we built it together? Every decision, every challenge, every joy, we've shared it all. Regrets about the road not taken." Cordelia thought of the letters that still arrived occasionally from Boston, updates on society, weddings, and charitable functions. News of Jeffrey Whitmore's eventual marriage to a banker's daughter who appreciated his steady income and predictable nature. "None," she said firmly. "That road would have been safe, but it wouldn't have been mine." This life messy and uncertain and beautiful. This is what I was meant for. And I was meant to find you, Maverick finished, his arm tightening around her. It's meant to be the man who gets to wake up beside you every morning, who gets to watch. You teach our daughter to be strong and independent. Speaking of daughters, Cordelia said with a smile in her voice, I have something to tell you. Maverick went very still. Something good, I hope? Something wonderful? Dr. Henley confirmed it today. We're going to have another baby. The silence stretched long enough that Cordelia began to worry. Then Maverick's free hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with a gentleness that spoke of reverence and joy. When early winter? It's just after Christmas, if his calculations are right and you're happy about it? Ecstatic, terrified, grateful. All at once, she turned to face him in the moonlight. What about you? I'm thinking about that first day. Again, when you hired me for the harvest and I thought I'd be moving on come winter. Never imagined I'd find a home. Never imagined I'd find a woman who'd see past the sighs and the silence to whatever was worth keeping underneath. I saw a man who could work hard, Cordelia quoted, smiling at the memory. I just didn't know how hard you'd work to make me happy. Every day for the rest of my life, if that's what it takes. The next morning brought young Phoenix Calloway to their door. A thin boy with old eyes and calloused hands that spoke of too much responsibility to young. Maverick knelt to the boy's level, his massive frame somehow less intimidating when he made himself smaller. Know anything about farming, son? Some, sir? I helped my pa with our garden before. ... The boy's voice trailed off. Well, farming's something you never stop learning. But the most important thing isn't what you know, it's whether you're willing to work and whether you can be trusted. Can you do those things? Yes, sir. Then you've got a place here as long as you want it. Nice. Autumn progressed into winter. The Thorpe household expanded in ways both expected and surprising. Phoenix proved to be not just willing but eager, absorbing Maverick's patient instruction like drought-parched earth soaking up rain. The boy had a natural affinity for animals and a quick mind for mechanical problems, making him invaluable during the busy harvest season. When baby Tobias arrived 2 days after Christmas, a robust boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's determined chin, the farmhouse felt complete, in a way that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with love. 2 children and an apprentice, Cordelia mused, watching Maverick teach Phoenix to mend harness while baby Tobias slept in a basket nearby, and Magnolia played with wooden blocks at their feet. We've become quite the family, but the best kind of family. Maverick replied, one that chooses itself. Spring brought news that transformed their local success into something larger. The State Agricultural College wanted to establish an experimental station, and they'd chosen the Thorpe farm as their model. The partnership would bring additional income, advanced techniques, and the kind of recognition that could benefit the entire county. They want us to demonstrate sustainable farming methods, Cordelia explained, spreading the correspondence across their kitchen table. Show other farmers how cooperation and innovation can increase yields while protecting the land means more visitors, more disruption. Also means more opportunities. For Phoenix, for our children, for every farmer in the county who's struggling to make ends meet. Maverick studied the documents with the careful attention he brought to every important decision. What do you think? Think we've been given a gift, the chance to share what we've learned, to help other people build the kind of life we've built. I can't imagine turning our backs on that. The formal agreement was signed in May, establishing the Thorpe Experimental Agricultural Station as a partnership between the State College and the most successful farm in 3 counties. The ceremony drew visitors from across the state, including several reporters who were fascinated by the story of the refined Eastern widow and the gentle giant who'd built an agricultural empire together. But the moment Cordelia treasured most came later. When the crowds had dispersed and the family sat together on their front porch, watching sunset paint the mountains gold, Phoenix was reading aloud from a book about crop rotation while the babies napped in their parents' arms. You know what? I realized today, Maverick said quietly. What's that? That first day when I told you I didn't talk much but I could work hard. I was only half right. How so? I do talk. Just took finding the right person to listen. Took finding a home worth talking about. Cordelia leaned against his shoulder, marveling at the journey that had brought them from that awkward first meeting to this moment of perfect contentment. Around them, their farm hummed, with quiet prosperity cattle grazing in moonlit pastures. Chickens settling into their coops, wheat rustling in fields that stretched to the horizon. "I love you, Maverick Thorpe," she said simply. "Love you too, Mrs. Thorpe. More than I ever thought possible." As stars emerged overhead, Phoenix's young voice continued reading about soil conservation and crop diversity, the practical poetry of agricultural science. The baby slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were cherished. And on the porch swing that had witnessed their courtship, their marriage, and now their growing family, Cordelia and Maverick held each other close, grateful for the courage that had brought them together and the love that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Their story had begun with a simple exchange: work offered, work accepted. But it had grown into something magnificent, a partnership that had transformed, not just their own lives, but an entire community, proving that sometimes the most unlikely combinations create the most extraordinary results. In the distance, an owl called across the valley, and Maverick's deep voice joined Phoenix's lighter one as they discussed tomorrow's plans. Home, Cordelia thought, with deep satisfaction. This was what home sounded like, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of people willing to face that struggle together, building something beautiful from the raw materials of love, trust, and unshakable commitment. The giant cowboy who'd once told her he didn't talk. Much had given her everything she'd never known she was looking for. A voice that mattered, a partnership that flourished, and a love that would last forever.